The military pressure on the federal Supreme Court has reached alarming proportions due to the possibility of generals losing their ranks.
This is not a criminal case. It's a petition alleging incompatibility and unfitness for the officer corps. And there has never been in the jurisprudence of this court a prior rejection of this type of action. What can happen is that the representation may be granted or denied. And in this case, if it is granted, the military officer who is being subjected to a military honor proceeding may lose their rank and commission.
The situation is explosive because behind the scenes, the tension is rising even more with Supreme Court justices involved in the Banco master case without even being investigated.
Supreme Court Justice Gilmar Mendez changed the law and barred the Senate from requesting the impeachment of court justices.
After the conviction of military personnel for the events of January 8th, the possibility of four-star officers being punished in the Superior Military Court has raised alarm in the barracks. Among active generals, there is fear that this precedent will turn the loss of rank into a recurring practice, undermining the hierarchy and stability of the armed forces. This disparity between the judiciary and the armed forces fuels a perception of injustice, and it provokes silent demands from the high command of the three military branches. For many officers, the loss of rank by generals would be the trigger for an institutional crisis capable of putting the balance between the branches of government at risk. But can this military pressure have any effect? Welcome to Vida no Quartel.
According to the newspaper Folha de São Paulo, Justice Alexandre de Moraes of the Federal Supreme Court took at least 8 flights on aircraft belonging to companies linked to Daniel Vorcaro, owner of Banco Master.
Armed Forces Governors Vorcaro and Dias Toffoli had more than 10 in-person meetings.
Never has a Supreme Federal Court minister been impeached in Brazil, just as no general officer has ever lost his rank. This reality, which always seemed untouchable, is now beginning to be questioned. The convictions of military personnel for the January 8th events have brought up the possibility of unprecedented punishments, shaking the historical pillars of the justice system and the armed forces. Among the names that may face this unprecedented punishment are 4-star generals like Braga Neto and Heleno, as well as the former Navy commander, Admiral Almir Garnier. The loss of rank would mean the definitive break of the bond with the armed forces, which results in the suspension of salary, official identification, and the right to carry a weapon, with only the family pension remaining because of Social Security contributions. This trial in the Superior Military Court not only puts the hierarchy within the armed forces in question, but also sheds light on the Supreme Court justices who are facing accusations of involvement in the Banco master case. For many officers, if generals can lose their ranks, it is only fair that ministers should at least be investigated, or else risk an unprecedented institutional crisis. Reports circulating on military blogs indicate that if nothing happens to the Supreme Court justices, even in the face of evidence presented by the federal police that would at least justify an investigation, pressure within the armed forces may increase.
And how are you going to explain that a court with justices who are being questioned by society can judge the military personnel involved in the January 8th events?
The perception is that if generals lose their ranks while justices remain untouchable, it creates a scenario of institutional inequality, where only the officers would be punished, while members of the Supreme Court would place themselves above good and evil.
Minister, let me get back to this. According to press reports, you have already said that you saw no problems either in Minister Alexandre's conduct or in Minister Toffoli's conduct in the Banco master case. But a significant portion of Brazilians doesn't think that way. In your opinion, wouldn't it be appropriate at the very least to provide clearer explanations about the nature of the relationship that they or their family members had with Daniel Vocaro?
That's a question that each person will have to address in their own way. What seems important to say is that this issue involving Vocaro, Master, and everything else, which the press or part of the press turned into a federal Supreme Court case, it's a problem, perhaps a deeper one, that reveals issues of regulation and the participation of the financial system. It seems to me that the press brought the Vocaro case to the Three Powers Square. If I were to look for the address of the Vocaro case, of the Master case, I would see it on Faria Lima.
This situation reinforces the criticism that the Supreme Court is acting with double standards. For the military, it is unacceptable that officers can be tried and convicted, while justices are not even investigated. The contrast between hierarchy and discipline, values always associated with the armed forces, and the apparent shielding of the judges, fuels a climate of distrust that threatens to turn into an institutional crisis. Lieutenant Colonel Mauro Cid's plea deal testimony revealed a delicate scenario behind the scenes. The closeness between the current Army commander, Tomás Paiva, and Justice Alexandre de Moraes. This connection, not yet fully exposed, could create a major institutional imbroglio. The perception of alignment between one of the highest military authorities and one of the most controversial justices of the federal Supreme Court generates distrust among officers. And it sparks the debate about how far power relations are tainted by political interests. The armed forces, which should be focused on their mission to protect the country and contribute to national development, end up involved in episodes that are completely outside the military scope. Instead of remaining as institutions separate from politics, there are reports of strange relationships and involvement in situations that generate distrust. This shift in focus weakens the image of the armed forces and undermines the trust of society, which expects discipline, hierarchy, and neutrality from the military. Meanwhile, Brazil faces a scenario of rising crime, and the world is experiencing moments of geopolitical turmoil. In this context, the population expects its armed forces to be a bastion of defense capable of ensuring sovereignty and stability, and not just another problem to be managed. With each new episode of political exposure or suspicion of involvement in illicit acts, the feeling grows that the institution is drifting away from its true mission, putting at risk not only its credibility but also national security. The Supreme Court justices protecting themselves from even being investigated, combined with the real possibility of generals losing their ranks, creates a scenario that could completely reshape institutional relations in Brazil. On one hand, the highest court in the country positions itself as untouchable. On the other, officers who have dedicated their entire lives to the armed forces may be punished in an unprecedented way, creating a contrast that fuels the perception of injustice and imbalance between the branches of government. Join the debate and leave your opinion in the comments. Are we really facing a genuine clash between the institutions? Or will everything end up swept under the rug, as is usually the case in Brazil?
It's a terrible thing. Your Excellency embarrasses us. Your Excellency is a disgrace to the court, a disgrace to all of us. An aggressive, coarse, rude temperament. That's terrible.
Here at Vida No Quartel, you stay updated on everything in the military world. Leave a like, subscribe, and watch one of the videos that's appearing on your screen. Forward fighters, see you next time.